Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining in from. And a warm welcome to all of you on this edition of our webinar. Uh, Hopefully, you're all doing good, keeping safe, and are all set to participate in this, I would think, a very exciting presentation today on the topic today, product management with Kanban. So let's get started. The agenda for today is I'll start with some introductions as usual and give you a quick word about Swift Kanban and Digite. The webinar, I should have mentioned this earlier, is being brought to you by Digite, Swift Kanban, and Squirrel North. The topic of the presentation is product management with Kanban, and the session will be presented by the partners from Squirrel North. At the end, we will have a Q&A session, and I'd encourage you to ask as many questions as you have using the questions panel on the right side of your screen, and we will take them at the end of the presentation. With that, I'd like to welcome the speakers today. Squirrel North is a consulting company that uses a multitude of management, agile, and lean disciplines in conjunction with industry-leading expertise in the Kanban method. The experts from Squirrel North, Martin Aziz, many years of working in the Fortune 500 companies in senior leadership positions, and now a full-time consultant, coach, and trainer. Fernando Cuenca started as a developer in the early 90s, carries the dev manager title for a brief period, and became a full-time coach in 2009. James Steele, 25 plus years experience overall, including many years as a chief technology officer at a global e-learning company, and now principal consultant at Squirrel North. And last but not least, Alexei Zaglov, known for his insights, especially in the quantitative aspects of Kanban and flow metrics, and also known very much for co-authoring the book Fit for Purpose with the Kanban method pioneer, David Anderson. Before I hand over the session to them, just a quick word about us. My name is Mahesh Singh. I'm a co-founder at Digite and run our marketing function and also our consulting side operations. A quick word about Digite. We have been a company known for our collaborative web-based tools for distributed teams, and I think especially relevant in these current times. We cover Lean Kanban, Agile Application Lifecycle Management, Project Portfolio Management as domains for our tooling. Headquartered here in Cupertino, California, which is where I'm based, with nearly 1 million users of our products around the world. And our key products are Swift Kanban, Swift Ease, and Swift Enterprise that cover the spectrum of various Agile frameworks that you might be using in your organization. I certainly welcome you to try some of them out or take a look at them if you're looking at tooling. Just a quick look at our Kanban tool, which is the focus of the talk today. Swift Kanban, of course, is predominantly used in the software and IT realm, supporting Kanban, Scrum, Scrumban teams, but also, of course, used in a variety of other business functions, including marketing, legal, HR, and just many business functions which are trying out visual methods of management or agile, or sort of moving towards an agile way of functioning. We are very well known for our portfolio management capability, where we provide a lot of capability around sophisticated workflow mapping and the ability to define portfolio lanes, which you see here at the top, to track progress of high-level program and portfolio initiatives. The ability to define custom hierarchies of work that you can then map to multiple boards. Our enterprise services planning capability that we built together with the Kanban community, and that lets you evaluate your overall system capability, assess risk, and then prioritize the right kind of work to be taken up at any point in time. And also just a lot of statistical analysis and modeling capability using Monte Carlo and other methods to help you become better at forecasting what can you deliver when and make the right commitments to your customers. Our analytics are in general very extensive and deep and support the Kanban method very well. We integrate using a set of technologies, including SwiftSync, Zapier, and our REST API, a rich set of tools that sit well in your ecosystem. So depending on whatever tools you're using, we can deliver the right solution for you. And then finally, just a quick look at our customers. You see some well-known names here, some not so well-known names. And we support customers from tens of people to tens of thousands of users using our products around the world, like we talked about earlier. So with that, let's get started. The webinar is being recorded, and we will give you a copy of the recording after the webinar is done. Like I said, feel free to enter questions at any time, and we will take up those at the end of the session. And before I hand over the session to Martin for the first part of the session, just a quick couple of questions to the audience about so that we know who you are. And so here is a poll that's coming up. If you could let us know, how long have you been practicing Kanban? We get some idea of what your experience levels are with or is with Kanban. So we'll give you a few seconds here to respond to the questions. Most likely, most of you are already doing some level of Kanban, but I know that many of you are still getting started. I'm always surprised to go to conferences and find that there are still people who are getting started, or companies that are still getting started with Agile. So, and even the Agile surveys talk about many companies being in early stages of implementation of Agile. So, anyway, so let's see the results. All right, so about 15% of you have not yet started, 20% less than a year, but then about 60% have had some amount of experience with Kanban. So wonderful. Just one other question. We want to know what is your role in the organization? What function do you represent? Like I said, many of our customers typically tend to be in software development, engineering, and IT. But we do have other functions using Kanban as well. So love to see how many of you represent which of these, especially, of course, given the topic today, how many of you come from the product management function? Let's take a look and see how we do on that one. Okay, looks like we have a reasonable amount of response. Let's take a look. Okay, great. So as possibly expected, today is a big representation from product management. Martin and comp team, I think that should be good news in terms of what they're going to be hearing from and learning from you. So with that, Martin and the rest of the Squirrel North team, a very warm welcome to all of you. I'm really thankful that you're doing this with us, and let's take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Mahesh. Something we've been talking about for some time to get this this webinar going, so I'm really glad that we're finally at this point. Topic that we both kind of exchanged that was kind of dear to our hearts. So let's get going. Thank you for the warm introduction. If you want more of our background about us and our consulting practice, you can go to our website, squirrelnorth.com. But let's go into the meat of today's webinar. So it's all, as you guessed it from the title, it's all about product management today. And the way we're going to look at this is, while it's not exhaustive, we've come up with the top 4 questions that we have encountered in our practice. These are the things that seem to be coming up over and over again. And so let's spend the next 45 minutes to an hour to kind of answer these questions. And so each one of us on the panel today are going to address one of these questions. And it starts with, do we have the capability and capacity to deliver on our promises? So if you're in a product management role, you may be asked this question, or people are you're asking this question of yourself. Next, what should we work on now, later, or never? So making some sort of triage type decision. Is this roadmap realistic? We've built this wonderful plan for the future. Is it going to happen? How do we make high quality decisions in a fast-paced environment? Okay, great. So we want to make good decisions, but obviously time is moving by and our environment may be very fast. How do we get this combination of quality and fast at the same time? So these are the questions that we're going to be spending some time answering. So let's start with the first one. So do we have the capability and capacity to deliver on our promises? And so we are obviously, this is a Kanban webinar, and we're going to be looking at this from the lens of how Kanban is going to be looking at these various questions and how we can actually go about resolving them. And for this topic, for this question, it's really one about balance. And we're going to look at it from the perspective of balance, and let's talk about what balance we're talking about here. So there is, if you are any kind of successful organization in your life cycle, eventually, and unfortunately permanently in most situations, the natural imbalance is one of opportunities outstripping your capabilities. It's just at some point in your life cycle, this is going to be your reality. And for those who put, the 50% or so of you on the line today who are in this role or support the role, you get what we're talking about. There's all these things that we could be doing. And so as a product manager, you are probably feeling a lot of a bit of a pinch here. If you think about it from the perspective of outside your organization, or maybe even customers within your organization, they're looking for new features, maybe new product lines, maybe supporting different markets that are currently not supported, and they're asking for all sorts of things. At the same time, the capability side of your organization, those who are working together to deliver what we are envisioning to deliver, they may be looking at you as a source of ever-increasing requests, maybe at times even seen as a bit unreasonable. And so it can maybe feel a bit like being stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, there are all sorts of coherent requests that seem like good ideas. On the other hand, there's only so much we can do, and we continue to tap into our capability. So there is this imbalance. What are we going to do about it? So we look at it from this perspective in Kanban as a balancing act between demand and capability. And so this is the challenge that we are trying to solve here. And it's not even just this concern about this imbalance, but the fact that this imbalance is constantly dynamic. Your customer needs are going to be changing all the time. Your market isn't staying still. So there is shifts in demand. So we're dealing with a volume problem, but we're also dealing with a change problem too. And at the same time, on your capability side, yes, you have to deal with the volume demand, but you also need to deal with the change in your market needs as well. So this need to be continuously congruent is a challenge that you will also need to deal with, because certain skills may need to arise as requests differ over time. So how do we keep these things in balance? Now, we could choose to just ignore it and say, suck it up, and this is kind of a fact of life. But there are obviously some real organizational risks, some business challenges, if you kind of, leave this as a bit of a fact of life. So, the top four that we see when this is unaddressed is overworked but unproductive workers. So everyone's working hard, but it just doesn't seem like we can quite get things out the door. There's always stuff that may be missed. And so although we're working hard, the productivity is really at question. Quality issues. These issues may cause delays in shipping product, shipping updates, or if we are making things on time, may cause a certain level of dissatisfaction with those consuming what you're producing. Lack of predictability and missed deadlines. So when is it going to ship? We said this, but is it actually happening? And so we always seem to be delaying. We always seem to be saying, oh, you know what, we're going to need a little bit more time. And then finally, broken promises. That interface between you and your stakeholders, your customers, your clients, broken promises, definitely not a good place to be, particularly if you're in a business that relies on repeat business. This is something that is going to make a difference between whether your customers are coming back and choosing you, or choosing an alternative approach across the street. All right, so these are things that we can't ignore, so let's do something about them. And so let's first look at what I call 20th century approaches to solving this problem. So things that are probably best left to the previous century. But unfortunately, we do them all the time still to this day. So on the demand side, we could overpromise, and this happens a lot. We'll promise things and hopefully things line up. Maybe we're relying on luck, maybe a bit of heroics, maybe we'll say, hey, you know what, all hands on deck, let's just go in and get it done. And so this is kind of how we deal with overpromising. We could refuse some work, and maybe that's a good strategy, but maybe it's a question of are we leaving money on the table? How long can we operate from the perspective of refusing work? What kind of work can we refuse? Aren't we in the business of satisfying needs anyway? On the capability side, we could hire more people, throw money at the problem, or maybe we just want to have better people, so we hire smarter people, or we just train people better. And on the training side, I think that if we look at our workforce today, we probably have the best educated workforce we've ever had. So has that really solved the problem? Now, all 5 of these strategies have one big thing in common. They're more about buying us time. They're looking at servicing this imbalance rather than dealing with the imbalance. So they don't resolve the imbalance problem. It just accepts the imbalance and looks to service it. And so if you hire more people, what the imbalance suggests is eventually you're just going to have to hire more, or we just won't be smart enough, or we can't overpromise enough. And so this just becomes a very unsustainable problem for us to figure out. So when we go back to Kanban, we're looking at not servicing this imbalance, but actually correcting it from the perspective of keeping it continuously congruent between both sides. And for us, it looks like solving this imbalance from 2 different directions. One is on the demand side with a whole bunch of tools around shaping it, and the other is on the capability side with a whole bunch of tools on how to improve it. When these 2 things come together, this is where we can truly get a better sense of balance. And we're going to cover some of these tools today, certainly not all of them. More than enough topic for several days rather than a quick webinar. But here's a list of some of them that you could potentially look up at some point. All right, so let's get back to this this idea of what are we doing in product management? How do we operate as an organization? So we got to go back to looking at this a view of the relationship with the customer and what is actually going on. So you look at this picture here, and there is some customer need out there that is either voiced or sensed. So it could be explicit or it could be implicit, or we're really good at understanding our customers. So our capability roadmaps are really good at sensing what they need. But anyway, so there is some need out there. And before our customers get to the point where they say, I got it, this is meeting my needs, or to some degree, there is going to be all this organizational collaboration. All right, we call this a service or a series of services, but all the collaboration between marketing and design and sales and development and technology and infrastructure and legal and all these other groups that may be required to have new features, new products, see the light of day. These are things that are going to have to collaborate before our customer gets to this I got it point. So going back to this idea of balance and looking at these 2 sides, if we look at the capability side, what Kanban is suggesting with quite a few tools is, can we discover optimal ways to on how our capacity within the organization can be both best leveraged. And so we try and find what that optimal capacity is and work to it, limit our capacity to that rate. And in particular, increase our transparency, make that capacity visible throughout the organization. And so when we limit our capacity to optimal rates and make it visible, we have an opportunity to stabilize our delivery rate and make the whole delivery process that much more reliable. So this is good. So how do we take advantage of that from a product management perspective? So when we look at the other side on shaping demand, we can now look at opportunities from the perspective of looking at things as potentially optional. So we have all these great opportunities and ideas, and how do we hold them back as options rather than committing them to them right away? So the trick here is we only commit to the best options, and then the question is when? Well, when we get signals that we have capacity from the capability side of the organization. And so they're working on improving their transparency. So you now have the opportunity to leverage signals that suggest capacity is there. And so the stability of that capability can now be leveraged. And so there is this interplay between the demand side and the capability side, and we call this an explicit commitment point. And so this is kind of one of the first big Kanban tools that is really a game changer for a lot of organizations. This idea of having a not an implicit commitment point where we make promises to our customers in various different ways, but a very explicit one. We are looking at capacity rates, we are looking at our capability, and we are converting opportunities and options into promises for customers. So this is kind of going back to the question, do we have the capability and capacity to deliver on our promises? And the answer is you can do it very coherently when working with an explicit commitment point. You are now looking at a triage point between holding back all sorts of opportunities as options, converting them into commitments as you get a better understanding of your capability. Now, in the next section, my colleague James will get into more nuance on working this commitment point as he looks at answering the next question.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Martin. So if we find ourselves in a situation where demand is outstripping our capability and we want to move towards a more balanced system of work, then we need to think about taking action that's going to help triage our work. So we need to be thoughtful and systematic about what we're going to work on now, later, or perhaps never. In the Kanban method, that thoughtful and systematic approach includes what we would call the replenishment event. So for a moment, I'd like you to consider this pizza restaurant, this image that we're looking at here. Much like the businesses that we work in, this establishment has a variety of customer demand, right? So they have walk-in customers. There's probably some customers that have reservations. There's group reservations. There's parties. Looks like there might be a delivery person who's responsible for dealing with all the takeout orders. And of course, there's the staff themselves. They probably create their own demand. They need to eat. They probably have maintenance work that they need to take care of in maintaining the restaurant. They probably need to prepare some food in advance. And I'd imagine that there's a lot of restocking of supplies that's going on. So there's a lot of demand in operating this restaurant. Now, despite all this demand, it seems by looking at this picture, if things are actually operating pretty smoothly. Customers are smiling, they look happy, the food looks tasty and hot, orders aren't piling up, and even the chef in the background who's making pizzas, he seems to be somewhat pleasant. So kind of, a reasonable situation here where everybody seems to be happy with what's going on. Now contrast this with a situation that would be quite a bit different. Imagine in this scenario that the walk-in customers could just barge in through the front door. They could walk past the hostess. They could kick open the kitchen door, walk into the kitchen, and demand from the chef their order. Oh, and of course their order would be the most urgent. Or imagine if the group reservations or parties could show up unannounced and again just barge in through the front door, demand seating, again move into the or kick open the kitchen door and just start hauling out all these demands. What about the delivery person? I could imagine them being overburdened. If you have all these calls coming in and you're not managing it, they'll be overburdened. They'll have an unrealistic workload and delivery expectations. I could go on and on and on. In a situation like this restaurant would be in complete chaos. The demand being put on all aspects of this restaurant, we could classify as being irrefutable. There's no saying no. We must just take all these orders in and just get them done. Now, you might be tempted to laugh at this, but this is the situation that a lot of professional services business find themselves in. This might be a situation that you find yourself in. So if you're in a situation like that, you're in a situation where you're kind of just being an order taker. Now that's probably not the way to run the business. Customers would be unhappy, the food would be too cold, it'd be taking too long, orders would be incorrect. The whole establishment would probably be a mess. And the staff would be stressed and unhappy. So what is it that this restaurant is doing to balance the demand with its capability? Well, they have a mechanism in place to replenish their delivery system such that it doesn't overburden their system, which is in this case their restaurant. So if we want that same balance and relief from overburdening in our business, then the days of just being order takers, they need to be over. So how can we move in a direction where the decision-making process of what to work on is not one that's going to overwhelm us? Well, the first thing we can do is to acknowledge that there's plenty of uncertainty in the nature of the work that we do, and there's plenty of uncertainty in the demand associated with that work. So that's number one. The second thing is to understand that there is lots of variability in that work. We need to be in a position where we create this scenario where on the one hand, we have options, and on the other hand, we have commitments. So not all ideas are great ideas. We want to get ahead of that. So if there's a lot of uncertainty, then we can view the demand that's coming in as optional. We don't need to commit to it right away. There comes a point in time, though, where we do need to take an option and we need to convert it into a commitment. We don't want to commit early because committing early implies that we have a lot of certainty about the future, but that's not the case. So we need to be very thoughtful in how we go about doing this. This act of evaluating our options and deciding what we should commit to now, never, or later, is what we would refer to as replenishment. So this is where we convert options into commitments. Now, here's a more holistic and distilled way to think about the act of replenishment. How might this look in terms of looking at this whole process? Well, one, we should meet frequently to look at the options that are ready. How often we should meet? Well, it depends. If you find that you have capacity in your system every day, then maybe you should be meeting every day. If you only have capacity every 2 weeks, then meet every 2 weeks. But at some point, people need to get together so that they can take a look at these options. The other thing you would like to do is you want the process for evaluating and selecting those options to be explicit. So how do you know what is a good option? Who should be in the room? What should come out of this replenishment act? So you should make those things explicit. Thirdly, this is a collaborative act that's occurring. You need to make sure that you have the people with the knowledge, the skills, and the influence discussing what they're able to commit to right now. And then last, you want to evolve how you develop and how you convert these options. So remember, somehow you're making decisions on what to work on right now. And with replenishment, what we're really doing is we're making that process transparent. We're making our decision-making process transparent. And then we want to work on improving that. Now, this isn't always easy. When you think about it, most people would rather be wrong than uncertain. So faced with three options, people would, one, they'd rather be right, two, wrong, and then third, uncertain. So most people would rather be wrong than uncertain. So why? Well, we're addicted to this false sense of security that commitment gives us. With Kanban, we're able to embrace that uncertainty. We're able to develop a better understanding of how we make decisions. We're able to leverage that uncertainty and use it to our advantage and make use of thinking in terms of optionality. And then lastly, we can improve on how we make those decisions. So again, to close up in thinking about replenishment, we want to view our demand as being optional. We want to have a replenishment act or event where we take a look at those options. And we want to commit to converting a couple of those options into commitments so that we can keep our promises. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to Alexi to talk about Upstream.
Thank you very much, James. I'd like to start with this question. And before the question, I took this picture of a whiteboard that visualizes some kind of process end to end in some company. And here's a really important question to all product managers. By the way, this picture will be different for each company, of course, because each company is different and its processes are all different. But here's a really important orientation question. Where do you find yourself in this picture? And lest you get lost in the details of the picture, here's a really simple answer. You are here. You are generally on the left-hand side of this picture before that commitment point that James just explained to you. And what do you do on the left-hand side of this picture? Well, you do things you know how to do best because this is who you are. You explore the problem space. You generate ideas how to solve your customers' problems. You validate business cases for your ideas, and you make sure that your ideas are feasible. In short, you create what we like to call real options. So one really important bit of advice that we want to give all our listeners today is that it's important to separate ideas from options. What do we mean by that? So let's contrast ideas and options. Ideas are usually fresh. You just came up with them. They may be kind of raw and they need some working on. They may be vague. They are sometimes brilliant. But remember, there is this saying, it sounded like a good idea at the time, and people use this saying from time to time, and they don't do it without a reason. So ideas may be unproven yet. And when we commit to our ideas prematurely, and when we give in to the temptation to just write this idea on a card and drop it into somebody's backlog, it's basically like barging into the kitchen of a pizza restaurant that James just described to you. And that is very likely to cause the imbalance of demand and capability that Martin told you about. So we have to be careful about that. So, however, the options that I want to shift to the right-hand side of the picture here, closer to that commitment point. They are proven, they're validated, they have a good business case, and they're feasible. And all of this because of the work, the great work that you did. And if these real options are picked at the next replenishment or commitment opportunity, they're actually likely to be delivered with predictable time and quality. So effectively, we see the end-to-end process as a connection of a funnel to a pipe. And the funnel is where you start with a lot of fresh ideas and you gradually filter them out as you discover all that information about them with various experiments and some iterative refinement, perhaps experimentation, like the build, measure, learn loop in Lean Startup. And you bring them towards the commitment point, where on a regular basis, you do that very same triage that James explained a few minutes ago, and then you commit into the delivery pipeline, and that's where your new product features get developed, tested, and ultimately deployed to customers. So if someone asks you today, what is your current product roadmap? If you had this kind of visualization of the process end to end, and we took the snapshot of the left-hand side of this picture where you are, product manager, then basically this left-hand side of the picture shows what solutions you're bringing to the market sooner. Those are actually closer to the commitment point. They are the ones validated, proven, you know about them, they're ready to commit. And it also shows solutions to what problem you will likely discover in some near future and bring to the market a little bit later than the current commitments. So basically the left-hand side of the picture, today's snapshot of it, is your today's roadmap. And that's how Kanban can help product managers. How do we get from an idea to an option? How do we travel this distance from the point where we come up with an idea to that moment of or act of replenishment when a real option representing that idea turns into a commitment? So generally speaking, we have usually a couple of ideas, and that's why I divided all the space to that thick orange line in the middle of the screen that visualizes the commitment point. I divided all that space into 4 columns. Now, the first column is, of course, here are all new ideas. There's a lot of them and they're all fresh. And the 4th column, right next to the commitment point, is kind of the collector for all the ready options that we can bring to the replenishment meeting. And in between, there are 2 major activities. by observing what people actually do in companies, we found that they generally discover iteratively two types of information. One that has something to do with the market risk. Is there a market for this idea? Are there does it actually solve the problem of some customer? Are customers willing to pay for it? How many of those customers are out there, and how much? And can we actually make money off of this idea or not? Do we have a business case for it? So discovering this kind of information takes no small amount of experimentation and testing of prototypes in front of customers, and some iterative refinement as you get better and better information informing your business case. We also observed there's a second type of information that has to be done. It has something to do with the technical risk and the feasibility of your idea. Are there some building blocks from which you can build the solution? And can your, let's say, engineering organization, can your technical teams actually build it? And as you progress from fresh ideas to real options, what usually happens is some ideas turn out not to be such good ideas, and you end up discarding them and promoting better, more feasible and more profitable ideas instead. So, and that's where that space for discarded ideas comes in. And by the time we reach the commitment point, we really got good ideas that allow us to actually deliver predictably after the commitment. And all right, so the next question is, how realistic is this roadmap? Something I asked at the start of my part of the presentation. So if we took this snapshot of the left-hand side of the board today, all right, let's ask some important questions. Let's say our roadmap calls for 120 product features in 2021. Then in order for this roadmap to be realistic, we need to have capability, and we need some evidence of that capability, that our company can actually sustain throughput of, let's say, 10 features per month. 10 features per month, so times 12 months, that's 120 features per year. Do we actually have this capability in our organization? Can we sustain it? And it's not just about the volume. It's also about the fact that our marketplace is perhaps very dynamic, which means we cannot just make a rigid plan for the year and execute it and then see you at the New Year's party. We need to have some frequent feedback, and we may need several course corrections throughout the year. And in order to actually be able to take those course corrections, we may need to be able to bring these features to the market with relatively short lead time. Maybe in 1 month in a typical case, maybe 2 months in the worst case, or whatever market requirements are in your case. Can we actually sustain that kind of delivery capability? And can we do all of that while keeping the level of quality our customers expect? So this means the realism of our roadmaps actually depends on our capability, our company's capability to deliver. So we need to have established, proven, measured, or at least known and understood capability to deliver something downstream of the commitment point. We need to have some predictable time and quality. And as a product manager, you may find it very useful to have a trusted partner on that downstream side responsible for delivery, someone you can actually work with. And I believe you also need to trust your own capabilities to explore the problem space and generate ideas. If you can trust that the new ideas are still coming, that you can discover new ideas tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, you may be more willing to not to write your today's ideas on cards and drop them into somebody's backlog, causing the overburdening that Martin and James warned you about. And you need to trust your own abilities to experiment, to validate your ideas iteratively and create real options. And at this moment, I'd like to turn it over my colleague Fernando to talk about risk and making decisions.
All right, thank you, Alexei. So to close the presentation, let's come back to the question of risk and making decisions. So when we say decisions in this context, we are talking about a very specific decision. We're talking about the decision of what should we work on and in which order. So, you know, we started this presentation talking about the need for balance, and we need to talk, and then we covered the concept of replenishment. So we need to make some sort of triage. Then Alexei walked you through the process of, you know, refining those options. Now we have many of them. So how do we choose? So the point we would like to make here, or we would like to argue here, is it's better to change the conversation, to move from prioritization. So that is the idea of attempting to build some sort of detailed plan of the future where we know exactly what the order of things is going to be, to the notion of selection. So what is it we need to decide right now that will make some impact in the future, right? So moving from prioritization to selection. Now, if we so we start with a bunch of options, as Alexei described, and we've been talking so far. So you develop a process that gives you a pool of ready options. So how do we choose? How do we select the next best one or the next optimal one? And when we attempt to do prioritization, this is what we try to do. We try to sort them in some sort of linear order, creating some sort of order list where we can just pick the first and then work the way down. And well, the first problem then is how do we even order them? What's the criteria? And there are many. So here are some of them that you might have encountered. You may choose, for example, that, you know, the important thing is to sort them by the cost of their delay, or perhaps their technical risk, or something like that. Or, you know, your organization may have other criteria, but, you know, there may be some thing you can look at, and that will give you the order. And of course, you know, people will start arguing about that. So which one is the most important one? Which one is the one that really matters? And how do we even look at them? So how do we even quantify, or how do we talk about technical risk, for example, or the screw up factor? So eventually somebody will say, well, maybe what we need is to find some sort of magic formula. If we can combine these multiple factors into some formula that will give us a ranking, and we use that number to rank the options. And, you know, that would be nice, but of course it's going to be difficult to find a formula that combines all the complexities in your environment. And even if you were able to do that, there may be mathematical challenges to us. So there is no guarantee that it's going to be mathematically valid. So and you know, after that, you start finding that priorities change all the time. Actually, when we start asking people about their sources of dissatisfaction, the idea or the complaint about priorities keep changing all the time is one that comes almost, you know, in every single session. So priorities are notoriously known for changing. So there must be a different way. And the way we would like you to think about it is thinking or realizing that each time you're making a decision, you're essentially taking some risk. So things may go one way or another. Therefore, there is some uncertainty. So when I use the word risk here, what I am referring to is risk as exposure to uncertainty, not just bad things that can happen to you. So usually we tend to see risk as bad things, but it's not just bad things. Is, well, there is an uncertainty in the decision. Things could go one way or another, and well, we don't really know. So the next thing you could conclude by looking at this picture is that risk or exposure to uncertainty is not just dominated by one thing. It's a multitude of things. It's what we call a multidimensional problem. Risk is a multidimensional problem because you have multiple concerns that are usually uncorrelated or hopefully uncorrelated, and well, they will play out in different ways. So what we're looking at here is a problem that needs to be looked at from multiple angles. So the the way to arrive to a decision needs to include a way to look at all these multiple dimensions simultaneously so we can take a holistic view. So as we do in Kanban for many things, we start with visualizing. So is there any way to visualize those risks? And this is the way you can do it. This is called a caveat chart. So a caveat chart is it's a diagram that shows multiple dimensions of something in this axis. So the first thing you would do is to define a series of dimensions you're interested in or you consider relevant, and you see these notches in each of the lines. So that's the first the first step on building one of these diagrams. You have to agree on which dimensions are important or relevant to you, and what are the different ways in which you can talk about this risk dimension. What are the different notches in the line? So here's an example. And so you will lay out these risks in different axes, and you will find and you will decide on these positions on the axis and lay them out so that the low risk is on the inside and the high risk is to the edges. So here's an example of that. So as you can see here, you select a few dimensions and you choose some notches in between, and it's not about just deciding on low, medium, high, for example, or small, medium, large. You need to have a different way to talk about these risks and hopefully make them quantifiable or at least a little bit more objective, so you can define where you are in a continuum. So, and this uncovers the second aspect of this technique. It's not just about visualization, as many things are in Kanban. They are a lot about the social aspect. So in order to come up with this diagram, a group of people need to first agree on what are the relevant risks we are going to be dealing with here, and what are the different notches in the line. So how are we going to talk about this risk? Hopefully in a way that, as I said, is quantifiable and more objective. So once you have that, what you can do is you can start plotting individual options against this what we call risk assessment framework. So essentially you start finding how each option ranks in the different dimensions, and you draw a line, and that gives you a polygon, this shape. So we call that shape a risk profile. So with this in front of you, a group of people can now have a conversation about the nature of the risks associated with this option in its multiple angles, all simultaneously. So it's because it's something visual and maybe something you're doing on a whiteboard or a digital tool, it becomes more tactile. It will engage people emotionally. So it will allow them to just have a more nuanced conversation about the risks involved in an option. And as I said before, if you've come up with notches for the line that represent quantifiable or more objective objective qualification of the risk, then you can have a much more objective conversation too, because this can get, these conversations can get very heated. Of course, it doesn't stop there. You could plot multiple options against the same chart. Now we would love to have the diagram looking like that. So, neatly options or risks neatly coinciding with another in a concentric in concentric shapes, something we like to call the Russian doll pattern, because that that would make decision easier. Each option is very separate from the other. Unfortunately, the world is much more nuanced and complicated, so we get pictures that look like this. So one dimension or one option will give you options ordered in one way, and then in another dimension the order will just flip. So, well, this just shows you the reason why trying to just get a linear order in prioritization is problematic, is because the world is complicated. So again, this is highlighting the social aspect of using caveat charts for assessing risks. Essentially, a group of people now can have a conversation about this, saying, well, how do we compare these two options in multiple dimensions? What's important for us? And then arrive to a decision, hopefully a consensus decision, or a more discussed decision that includes the multiple aspects or multiple dimensions into the discussion. Now you can go a step even further. You could plot on the chart also a threshold. You could come up, even before considering any option, what would be the acceptable threshold for optimal options or acceptable options or good options or options that align with our strategy. So what's the minimum level or the maximum level of risk we want to take? And then you plot the options, and this will tell you which options fall within or outside that threshold. What this does, again, bringing up the social aspect of this, is that you can start now comparing options not just with other options, but with some sort of policy or some sort of agreement we've made beforehand. It allows you to codify decision making, so this can cut down the time that it takes to arrive to a decision. So if something falls within the threshold, well, we know that that's an acceptable option. If something is clearly outside, well, we probably need to talk about that. Well, those options that fall in between, those are the ones who need more time. So if you're looking for ways to make decisions more agile in a way, so more quick and better aligned, this is a way of doing it. Again, what I wanted to bring up here is that there is the aspect of coming up with the diagrams and comparing options, but it's also the social aspect of this. Is arriving to the decisions in a way that is more aligned, perhaps quicker, more objective, with less argumentation. So finally, one of the questions I'd like to address is where do these caveat charts come from? When do we build them? And what it may help think here is that we are so we would like to assess these risks prior to make a decision, and we make the decision at that replenishment point. So that means that these caveat charts need to be built hopefully prior arriving to that that replenishment meeting that James described earlier. So at the same time, Alexis spoke about how the upstream process is what allows you to explore the options and refine them. So you can combine all these two ideas and essentially realize that these caveat charts can be built as the options move through that funnel. So as your understanding of the option increases, as you are exploring different aspects, so Alexis talked about market risk and technical risk. So you're exploring different aspects of risks. This is where you can start building all this, your understanding of the multiple dimensions of risk, build a caveat chart, and get the chart ready for your commitment decision at replenishment. So one way you can think of this is if by the time something shows up at the beginning of the funnel, at the left point of the funnel, you're already able to build a fully formed caveat chart, well, you should be questioning what's the nature really of your funnel. What is your funnel actually helping you to do? If you have uncovered all risk already, well, maybe those activities should be done after commitment, or maybe you should defer the assessment of the risk. So you can combine these two ideas and hopefully you arrive to a full assessment of risk by the time you get to commitment. So to summarize what we've been discussing so far in the webinar, we brought to you 4 questions. So we started with the question of do we have the capability, and we argued that the answer to that was striving for balance. After that, we considered the question of when should we start this now, or should we define this, or should we defer this for later? The tool for that is replenishment. Now, in order to arrive to that point, we need to have ready options. We need to have some sort of process to vet ideas and narrow down all our options. Alexei described the process of the upstream workflow to do that, which essentially marshals all these options towards a commitment point. And by then you will have to make a decision. Do you have information to do this? James referred to this. So you will make a decision about starting now, later, or never. How you do that? Well, one way to do that is to see through the lens of risk. I described to you a process by which you can arrive to an assessment of multiple risks involved, and hopefully that will get you to better decision making. So with that, that's all we wanted to cover today. We would like to thank you for your attention and maybe turn to some questions. So back to Mahesh.
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you to the entire team for a fascinating presentation on a topic that is of particular affinity for me as a product manager. I've been in this business for a long time. So let me start firstly by inviting audience to ask questions. I think you rarely get a chance to meet a distinguished panel such as this and get your questions answered. So I hope that if you have questions, you will go ahead and ask them in this in the questions panel on your screens. Let me start with one from my side to the team, and any of you can answer. One of the challenges that I've seen, and probably the most common challenge that I've seen, is is it the uncertainty of the options, or is it the capacity to deliver? In general, what I've seen is that as a product manager, we know there are so many things that we should be doing in our products. We know that those things are either going to be great usability enhancements or a great new feature that is going to be helpful to a specific segment of our customers, but we simply don't have the capacity to do that. Rarely have I seen that there is disagreement on should we do it. It is more what is the most important thing to do first. So how do you see that happening? Do you see uncertainty versus capacity as one or the other being more important? What do you see with your clients? And who'd like to take that question?
I mean, I'll give you my perspective, and it kind of connects to the section I covered earlier on, in that, I mean, it's very hard to kind of put a kind of a repeated formula to that, because both of those, depending on which organizations you go to, tend to be very challenging. I mean, if I go to most organizations I consult with, this idea of overburdened capacity is always there. And then it connects directly to, hey, we can't do all of our things, right? All the things that we're doing. Trying to separate the two is somewhat trying to separate a coin with two sides, right? Because if we didn't have this constraint on capacity, then we wouldn't have to make decisions on which options we want to convert, right? Because we would do all the options. And so, this idea of constraint on the capacity side showing up as needing to deal with uncertainty is kind of connected, right? The idea is that I have to deal with that uncertainty, because if I make poor decisions on selecting options, well, the cost of that is, releasing poor products to the marketplace, but also I've basically taken up capacity that's precious and few in my delivery side of my organization that should have been devoted to something else. And so there's a lot of waste there. Now, that waste, I know we kind of glossed over it very quickly in the presentation, but you might have noticed there was a word abort shown at some point. I think it was in a couple spots. And this is where the organization finds that they've committed to something that they shouldn't have committed to, and they want to stop, right? And best to do that before you commit, but in many cases we find it's done in the delivery part of the process, and unfortunately in quite a lot of cases it's found after it's reached the marketplace.
Yep.
The most wasteful part, right? So
yep.
in trying to answer your question, is there one versus the other? We're really talking about two aspects of the same thing.
Okay, yeah, and I completely see your point there. Yes,
something to add here is something Alexi mentioned during his part of the presentation was that you need to understand your delivery capability. So because you were asking about uncertainty on delivery, right? So I mentioned a bunch of risks and uncertainties that you may be facing, about the product itself, but there is also uncertainty on the delivery side. Do you even understand if you have the capability to do what you may choose to do? And yes, that's something we find very often, that understanding of your delivery capability sometimes is lacking or not very high. So therefore that introduces even more uncertainty that has nothing to do with actually your capability to define the product or come up with ideas, but can we actually put it out? So maybe that speaks to a different problem, is, well, you need to work on your delivery side first to make it more predictable, or even understand what you have, and then the other risk will start bearing more weight, right?
Yeah, makes sense. I think one of the challenges, of course, is also that while you may have a good picture of your capability and your capacity, there is simply a refusal to believe that is the capacity that you have, especially when it comes to leadership or customers and stakeholders. And that's sort of the sort of struggle that happens between management and delivery teams as to what is that you can deliver and why can't you deliver more. Those are the kind of questions get asked. And so there is a related question from Olivier here. What are the downsides of commitment? How should we push back at pressure to commit? A very common challenge that most delivery teams face.
Well, I can take a shot at contributing to that. So the downsides are if you're committing too early, then you're implying that there isn't a lot of that uncertainty. So the earlier you're going to commit, then the better informed you better be about the future. So the downside is that you're going to get it wrong. So if you commit to too much or you commit too early and your situation changes because it's very dynamic, then you're going to be in a situation that Martin just talked about where you're going to have to abort things. And that's going to be very frustrating and it's going to be very expensive. So that would be one of the big downsides to it.
All right. There's another question which is, I think, interesting, happens to us also a lot. Part of reducing uncertainty is exploring feasibility of that option, whether that option can be delivered, which may need technical people rather than the product-focused members of the team. The technical folks are busy with delivering the current committed items. How and how much do you get them involved in the discovery so that the whole team is working together? Does the before-after commitment point discourage product management and delivery teams working together on the same problem?
So are you referring to people working on both sides of the commitment point?
So, so the question, I guess, is that on the upstream side, it is the product managers, the functional folks that are evaluating options. But for some of those options, you actually need input from the downstream folks, your tech teams, to even know whether they are feasible or not. And those guys are busy with the things that are already been committed. So how do you work together? How do you get them involved enough to make sure that you're making real commitments?
Mahesh, I can take this question and speak from my own experience. So it's really important to make it very explicit that what you're looking for at this point is not a fully built solution, but only an answer to a very focused question: is this technically feasible? And all we need is usually a snippet of code, something that can be done very quickly by a technical person that basically proves, yes, we can do it. And that proving this may be a fraction of work that it takes to build the whole solution, because we don't need to build the whole solution at this point. I notice very often in organizations kind of this difference is not explicit. So people just say, oh, I would like you to work on this or get started on this because this is technically difficult and we don't know. Well, if we put it more explicitly and clearly that we're looking for some kind of experiment and proof rather than the full solution, then that really helps not to overburden those busy folks in the engineering department.
I'll just add to that is, we also need to look at the type of risk and the magnitude of risk, right? So not all technical risks are of equal concern, and sometimes you need to separate the risk out, right? So when you look at some options, and if something is really risky right now, and you would have to spend a lot of time to deal with all the risk, you may want to actually start to separate that option into smaller options, right? And see what embedded options exist within that, and maybe deal with some of that risk on its own, right? Or in isolation. So you're committing to some smaller part that you feel that you can take on a certain amount of risk as you commit to it, but not necessarily everything.
Well, one of the things that we do internally at Digita is that we make sure that the replenishment meetings, we also have representation from our engineering team. So typically the lead architect and the engineering managers are also present, and they can weigh in on what seems to be doable versus what might need more investigation. And the second thing that we also do is to separate the commitment points into multiple stages, where we do it both at a functional discussion stage, as well as if we feel that there is risk or there is uncertainty or not enough understanding, we get some UI frameworks done and then discuss based on how the implementation would look like within the application. Because we have an existing product, it's being enhanced, we can build some UI prototypes or wireframes to discuss it more knowledgeably. So that helps as well. So certainly the involvement of the downstream people can be pretty important in many cases, and they just have to have the commitment to be available there.
Something important to clarify at this point, when Alexis showed that picture that says product managers, you work here, it doesn't mean you are the only ones working here, right?
Correct.
So the board represents movement of work, not movement of people. So so yes, what we call downstream people and upstream people, well, we need to be careful about that, because really what we are saying is work is upstream of the commitment point. There may be some technical activity that maybe they're done by people who normally work downstream, but that doesn't make them downstream, right? Absolutely. So there's collaboration going on. The question really is back to Martin's point of balance, right? So if you're going to be multitasking across the commitment point, what's the impact of that? Do you have the capacity to do that, right?
Exactly.
Are you overburdening people just to have lots of work downstream that is committed and waiting versus working here with other work that is speculative and just experimental? So there's going to be a multitasking component, so is that under balance?
Okay. Slightly different question from, not different, but from a different domain, so to speak. Question from Jill. What if you're an operations team, like a help desk team? You can't defer or reject those tickets. So do you see this being applied in an ops context? And I would think that it's still relevant, but maybe slightly differently.
Yes, I'll take this question. Actually, we have a certain client where there is one ingenious manager in their IT operations department who actually seems to find the commitment point anywhere in even every hopelessly overburdened we're just order takers kind of service. So I actually found that it makes sense to put a little bit of time gap, even if it's only a few minutes, between the submission of the request from a customer to some technical team member taking that request. So they basically pull several requests together that arrived in the last, let's say, hour or so, and they selectively take priorities, so that basically it allows them to decide all the time what they should now versus later. So they never actually discard any of those requests, right? Because they do have to process all of the entire volume of requests. But a very short pause after receiving the request allows them to prioritize them properly, so that they maintain the right levels of service for all customers, and not some customers getting in the queue at the expense of others. So so the notion of commitment point is important because it reinforces good triage discipline on a regular basis. And that includes operation type of services with irrefutable demand as well.
I would add that, operations group have been subtle masters at this for quite some time. You walk into any environment that does operations, and the concept, you might have different names, but a usual one is severity 1, severity 2, severity 3, or tier 1, and so on. And so what are they doing? They're saying, okay, I'm going to treat this thing as, we're going to treat it all as irrefutable, but severity 1 we're going to do right now, and 2 we're going to put on the back burner, and 3 we'll look at it when we have time. And there might be some like, oh, known issue, and that's the code for we ain't doing this. And so there is it may feel irrefutable, but there is this triaging and explicit commitment by assigning it severity that acts as a bit of a proxy on how to handle this, right? And I think that this is something that operations group have really on their own discovered quite some time ago, but it's essentially a very similar mechanism.
Yep, yeah, and I was going to use the word triaging. Is I think comes naturally in the way that they handle their input pipeline. I know we are running over time a fair bit, but I'm going to take one last question, which is I think interesting. The question is from Amblio. I hope that I'm pronouncing the name correctly. The question is, given that there is much uncertainty in selecting the dimensions of risk, and there is much uncertainty in the relative scaling of these dimensions, what do you recommend as a method to measure and improve the selection of the risk dimensions?
Well, do you have a mechanism to reflect on that? So what are the feedback loops that you have to reflect on the decisions you're making? So you will come up initially with some sort of dimensions. Let's say you pick 5, and for each of these you will come up with a scale, and well, you will start making decisions on that. So how often do you reflect on the results of that to see if they are achieving your goals or not? So feedback, again, would be the answer. Do you have a feedback mechanism in place? In Kanban, we have service delivery reviews and operation reviews and strategy reviews. What's coming out of that informs the decision on how to select the risk dimensions, their notches or their scale, and are these even the right dimensions to choose?
So yes, I'd like to add something to what Fernando said and kind of build on the presentation section that he presented. So what we find practically is that we don't need to reduce uncertainty, a very large extent of uncertainty, to, let's say, 1 point of full certainty before we make a decision. All we need to do is narrow the range of uncertainty somewhat, and now it's a narrow range of possibilities, and this may be enough to make a confident decision. So we focus on narrowing the range of uncertainty, and when doing this, turns out that out of a huge stream of information that we can get by market research, by prototyping, by experimenting, various lean startup techniques, and so on and so forth, out of this volume of information, actually relatively few bits of information stand out in terms of their value, and the value is narrowing down the range of uncertainty. And so this imbalance of value, some information is much more valuable than other, that tends to get reflected in the design of those custom risk assessment frameworks that Fernando presented to you. So the choice of access for risk dimensions, the choice of taxonomies or scales in each risk dimensions, they're not accidental, and they're usually driven by your knowledge of business domain and your knowledge of what sources of information generally contribute to the most reduction of uncertainty. And that helps you reduce that uncertainty relatively quickly, focus on the right sources of information, don't bother about the rest, and reach consensus decision with your colleagues quickly.
Perfect. All right, I think we need to wrap up. I can see that we are losing people as they run out of time here. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and thank all of you who have been, attending this webinar and have patiently sat through the entire Q&A session. I'm sorry we haven't addressed all of your questions, but those that have remained unanswered, we'll make sure that they get answered to you in follow-up emails. I wanted to show you just one quick picture of what you can do in Swift Kanban in terms of the capability that we provide for many of the things that the Squirrel team presented, including defining the risk dimensions in Kvyat charts and then using them as a way to replenish your Kanban board. Irrespective, let me go ahead and share our contact information. Please feel free to get in touch with the team at Squirrel as well as at Digite for any follow-up questions or any other topics that you want to discuss. I just wanted to leave this last slide here while we wind up here. This is our upcoming webinar with Dr. Andy Carmichael, who will be presenting the next webinar with us. And with that, I'd like to again thank you, Martin, James, Fernando, and Alexei, for a fantastic session. Like I said, we get to do these panels every, rather I would say, not very often, and it's really great to have all of you here to present for this webinar. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mahesh.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
All right, take care and have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you on our next webinar.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Bye.
you.